And welcoming Brandon up to the stage.
Thank you.
Hey, this guy, he's going to introduce me tonight. He asked me for what's a fun fact to share. And the first thing she said was, you could tell me you danced in the Miss Alabama pageant. No, I'm just kidding. Absolutely do not tell them that. So I knew that that's what I had to share, of course. So, but yeah, my wife and I have been married about 12 years. I have a 8-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. About 5.5 years ago, we moved to Boston area. We really picked to move to Boston because of this. Obviously, you can guess I'm a persuaded Christian, and she and I had decided we wanted to live somewhere where there weren't very many of them. And we settled on a more secular area, one preferably with more universities around, because that's who I'm interested in knowing and talking with and having ongoing in-person conversations. So you're why we moved here. So we started looking for church and work. I worked for MathWorks for a couple of years. If anyone's heard of MATLAB, I was a technical consultant for them. Just recently left my job with Shell to get another shot at entrepreneurship. That can often sound like, I don't know, like something worth sharing, that you have a background in entrepreneurship or you've gone to start another company, and people have been congratulating me a lot recently. And I say, it's pretty easy to become unemployed, so I would hold off on the congratulations. You can hold it. And similar to dancing and lots of other things, I'm not really an expert on anything. I have a lot of interests, and I dabble. So that's what you're getting tonight. And I say that to offer you thank you. That I'm invited to speak at all is a privilege to me. And I really enjoy this. And despite being an amateur, particularly of philosophy, I still can, I think, make you a promise. I think that if you'll stick with me for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm confident that you will leave here better able to think and communicate about the ideas that are most important in life. I'm confident that you will leave here better able to think about things that are most contentious today, and better to communicate with those, including, and maybe especially, those with whom you disagree. Okay? So, and I'm hoping to do that through this title, Making Sense of Faith. Can a thinking person have faith? This question has been very important for me for a long time. And amongst other reasons, is because I never really liked the way I heard the word faith used in sentences often. I'm going to give you here several definitions or descriptions that people have given, the first of which are from people who would not consider themselves theists, either atheists or agnostics. Richard Dawkins says that the whole point of religious faith is that it does not depend on rational justification. Bertrand Russell said, we may define faith as a firm belief in something for which there is no evidence. Voltaire, faith consists in believing not what appears to be true, but what appears to our understanding to be false. Or most simply, as Mark Twain says, faith is believing in what you know ain't true. My favorite of the non-theist is this one. This is because it's most consistent. I think this is most specific, the least rhetoric. Follow me. A.J. Carlson, he was one of the early presidents of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He says, the scientist tries to rid himself of all faiths and beliefs. He either knows or he does not know. If he knows, there's no room for faith or belief. If he does not know, he has no right to faith or belief. Okay? So I don't prefer those uses of the word, and those definitions are given from them. But let me give you a few more. Bear with me on these quotes. These are now from well-known Christians. I'm not going to give the names of them. One is explaining, he's holding a clenched fist, and he says, am I holding a $20 bill in my hand? And one person raises their hand. Well, now I'm going to destroy your faith. He opens his hand and he shows There's a $20 bill. He says, the reason I just destroyed your faith is because now you know. And when knowledge comes, faith is no longer needed. A couple others, very famous Christian apologists, say basically the same thing. They said, I found out that I think it was going to take more faith to remain an atheist than to become a Christian. And then again, here's a long one, but this is the most clearly unclear of all of them. Okay? In a debate, this apologist said, the believer is much closer to the good agnostic than you realize. Think about the connotation of the term believer. A believer is distinguished from a knower. If you know something, you wouldn't say you believe in it. You believe in something when you don't know for sure. I believe in the planet Uranus. I haven't been there, but I would say it's out there. I wouldn't say I believe in my brother because I know the guy. So knowledge is of a different status than belief. The reason we all call ourselves believers is because we don't know. In fact, that's why there's faith. Faith is the bridge between belief and knowledge, whatever that means. Last quote for a little while. We have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. That's from the book of 1 John. Now, in case you don't know, haven't noticed, faith is a noun, and we don't have a verb equivalent in English. Okay? Well, that's not the case in Greek and a lot of other languages. They have a word, a noun, pisti, and they have a verb equivalent, which I can't pronounce. And in English versions of the New Testament, they translate it believe. So you have faith as a noun, the verb form is believe. And I think that causes a lot of confusion for people. And one reason I don't really like any definition of the word faith that includes the word believe in it. All right, it's just not going to get me very far. It seems ambiguous, circular. I point that out to you at this point because, so you know that passage I just read from the Bible is saying, we have come to have faith and know. Okay? So I didn't necessarily refute anything from any of these quotes that I just read, other than say at least the Christians have explaining to do. What do you mean? What were you talking about that there's this inverse relationship between faith and knowledge when, and I just read one little verse, there's other ideas we could point to, that seems to be the exact opposite actually. Okay? So early on, when I identified as a Christian, I was very confused on this front. Of course, I had lots of questions. I felt like I thought a lot, and I was being challenged by at least these two groups. I had non-Christian friends, particularly more modern. The new atheists were far bigger and popular and influential at the time. And they're just telling me I'm a walking contradiction. Like sometimes I'm being all rational, using mathematics, trying to do my studies. And other times, you just throw that out the window. All right, and you're just guessing, talking about all this God stuff. And then I've had very kind of similar things coming from Christian groups, and there's like maybe two sets. One set, it was more of a discouragement that I was doing something that at best was unnecessary, or at worst it was wrong. You should not be pursuing reasons and thinking and all this difficult question asking. You just believe. That's not what faith is about, allegedly. But I'm claiming some pretty audacious things. I mean, I'm claiming to think that there's a God. I'm claiming to think that Jesus is his son who came to earth. I mean, it seemed perfectly reasonable to me that someone should ask about that. Why on earth would I believe such audacious, crazy things? But even some of the Christians who were, I mean, and these are friends, right? These are helpful for me. So this is confusion of this word. They would say, of course you need reasons, right? You get reasons, you get reasons, you get reasons, but reasons only take you so far. Then you need faith to plug the gap. And I was confused on this use of the word. This is super common. This didn't help me because I'm going, obviously I have the text like I read, the coupling there that you're saying is different. But further, there's a reductio there. Like if you're saying that faith is just different. You call it knowledge or call it certainty, and we have reasons or arguments or evidence, and we're stacking it up, and then now there's this gap left. Well, how are we going to plug that gap? Oh, that's faith. Well, you're telling me then the less and less reason I have, the more faith I have, and so the most faith is something that I know is not true. It's kind of what Voltaire and some of them said. That can't be what we mean. Can't be what the Bible means. It's easy to insert that definition in verse after verse, passage after argument after argument, and go, that's nonsense. It makes no sense to these things I'm reading. That can't be what we mean. And further, it's not honoring to someone else, right? Imagine, it could be, we could be talking about God, or we're talking about my spouse. Why do you have faith in that person? Why do you believe that person? No reason. It's a guess. It's a choice, feeling, merely. I don't have any reasons. You die, you go see God. Hey, why did you believe in me? Why did you believe in my book? Roll the dice. Risk return. Pascal's wager, I guess. No reason. There's no honor in that. There's no appreciation for that. My wife does not want to hear that from me. Why do you love me? Why do you believe in me? Why do you have faith in me? It's why that quote from that Christian didn't make any sense. I wouldn't say I believe in my brother. If he's believable, that's exactly what you would say. If you say you don't believe in him, that sounds like an insult. Why? Because there's got to be reasons. Something about the character, something you've observed. These could not be right. So, what is this right definition? Okay? I'll give you my best shot. Okay? I think the best definition, the way you should use the word faith, most often, obviously, words have semantic range. Okay, I know that. Okay, but the best definition of word faith, synonym would be dependence, reliance. That which you have faith in is that which you depend on, that which you rely on. Now, obviously we have like a spectrum of things we depend on. You're depending on these chairs right now, and we don't normally talk about faith in chairs. Fair enough, okay, I get that. We're exercising dependence all the time, right? Dependence on a microphone, dependence on people, obey the traffic lights, whatever, okay? And we're not tempted to insert the word faith there, fine. Usually we mean something deeper. Something I'm depending on that's down there. The kind of things that when you say, well, why? Why do you do that? And why is that? And why is that? And you keep going. Eventually you're going to hit something. Could be more than one thing. Finally, that is the thing you are depending. That is what you have your faith in. How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, how do you know that? How do you know that, right? And you go down. Finally, you hit something from which you're not arguing for it, you're arguing from it. Okay? It's not merely intellectual, but we're talking here about how knowledge. That's the best, I think, use of the word faith. So how does that relate to thinking? How does that relate to knowledge? Obviously, the things that you have your faith in, the things that are deepest, are those where you normally use words like, well, that's self-evident. Or that's a necessary truth. That's what we assume or we presuppose. That's the kind of language we'll use about things when it comes to knowledge, what we have our faith in. If you're a foundationalist, it's a branch of epistemology. Epistemology is the study of how do we know things in philosophy. They would talk about properly basic beliefs. Beliefs that are at the bottom that you don't argue for, but you argue from them. So maybe to illustrate this definition of faith a little more, how does it relate to knowing things? I'm just going to tell you, here, there's two primary schools of epistemology, at least classically. Okay, there's obviously tons and tons. All these academics got to publish papers, you know. Historically, there's two main schools, right? Empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism is a philosophy of coming to know things through sense experience, primarily. Induction, science, bottom-up reasoning. You observe particulars and you try to extrapolate to the whole, right? I observed that all these marbles are white. The marbles came out of that bag. Therefore, all the marbles in that bag are white. That is induction empirically. Okay? Rationalism is top-down kind of thinking. Reason, logic, deduction. You start from the whole and you deduce to particulars. So, the marbles in that bag are white. Those marbles are from that bag. Therefore, those marbles are white. Okay, deduction. Where does faith come in either of these systems of thought? It's quite easy. There's lots of examples. I'll give you maybe two from each. Science, empiricism. One, if one wants to think that way, if one wants to use it to come to know things, you are dependent on you're dependent on the regularity of nature. I assume y'all have heard this, thought about this. You're at a smart school. Probably most of you are scientists of some type or applied scientists. You must depend upon the regularity of nature. You don't use observation to come up with to discover that there is a general rule. You assume there's a general rule. We have to make observations about it, and then we try to figure out what it is, to induct what it is. Okay? And you depend on the fact that now you take that general rule and you try to predict future event. And you make the observations on that. The only reason why you try to predict, I assume y'all know that observation prediction, the heart of the scientific method, the reason you're trying to predict is because you assume the laws of physics have not changed. Okay? If you, surely this illustration will connect with most of you, right? If you train your machine learning model and you don't hold out any of your test or validation data, okay, and all the tests look good, and then you have some new data you haven't seen before, you try to make your observations, and the results are terrible. Do you go, oh, the laws of physics must have changed in between when we took that samples to now? Right? Or is it, no, it's overfit. Your hypothesis is not a general one. It does not extrapolate to the unseen data. Right? It's about the consistency of nature. Is it regular? You depend upon it. David Hume is one who popularized this. This isn't some sleight of hand from theist or something like that. This is a dependency. Not something you argue for so much as we argue from it. Second, we depend on the regularity of nature to do science and empiricism. We also depend on our sense experience. The assumption that our perception, what we are taking in is happening in here in our brains, actually corresponds to that which is out there. Everyone has seen the movies, right? Y'all are familiar with this idea. It goes back farther. It's popularized probably by Immanuel Kant, at least the popular interpretation of him. This idea that there's this world out there and then there's the world in here. Okay? How do I know? How do I figure out the connection between the two? It's an assumption. It is something you lean on. It is a foundational thing that we then reason from it. Okay? That is the only way I know to use the word faith consistently, is to talk about saying we have faith in those kinds of things. Okay? Let's go to rationalism. In rationalism, there's at least two things that you depend on. One, it depends on the laws of logic. Law of identity, law of excluded middle, law of non-contradiction. How do you argue for them? What is the syllogism you put together to say that you can do syllogisms? They are first principles on which we stand to think and do deduction. Okay? They have to be assumed. Similarly, you have axioms of different kinds of, there's different kinds of arguments where you need axioms, but the most important, or the most well-known and easiest to explain, is mathematics. You have axioms of the real number system from which you go and deduce other things. You assume there's an entity such that when you add it to another entity, you get back the latter entity. That is an axiom that must be leaned on, and then you can prove 2 + 2 is 4 under the real number system using base 10, right, etc. Those are assumptions you must make to do the deduction. That is what we mean. That is what should be meant. I would encourage you to use when you talk about faith. We're talking about leaning on these things that we do not argue for them so much as we argue from them. They are our first principles. That is what I mean by faith. So if you've tracked with me so far, I've already answered like the sub-question. Where does thinking come in for, or faith come in for the thinking person? Can thinking person have faith? And the answer is that the only way to not have faith is to not think. All right, that's my response. If you are thinking, you have faith. Now we have a reaction to that that's negative, like oh, this is some kind of sleight of hand, right? Trying to get God to seem more reasonable or something like that. I haven't said anything about that necessarily yet. I'm not trying to trick you. There is no other way I understand it. When I say I have faith in God, I might mean more than what I've said, but I don't mean less. Dependence. I lean on it. It is the bottom. Okay? So I've tried to encourage you to think about this is what we should mean in English, and we do sometimes. It's just not common, right? We think of Christmas movie type of faith, right? Just wishful thinking. Okay, wouldn't it be nice if it were the case? It's not at all how I think we ought to use it. It's not a very helpful way of thinking. I hope that's come across. I'm going to move on to some other ideas I think will help you as well. Again, illustrate what I mean. Start to expand this out where it can help you to think and help you talk with others. Next word is religion. I don't dislike how it's used too much, but it's got such a spectrum that it's not that useful of a word for me very often. Maybe a good definition could be something like the rules by which people decide who are good people and who are bad people. Something like that. But even that's not that good because that makes it sound like it's something that's more general. For some people, religion is this private, personal thing. Maybe religion has something to do with belief in God. Well, historic Buddhism is atheistic, so that's not going to be great either. What I want to promote for you is a word that you probably have heard and you do know, and it is good. It is worldview. Use the word and think in terms of a worldview. Worldview being that set of these fundamental ideas from which you interpret the world, you see the world. This set of fundamental beliefs that you make decisions on. The things that motivate you. Okay, or to say it a different way, it's like your answer to these fundamental questions about life. Where did everything come from? Right? Are humans special in the universe? What is wrong? What is the solution? What is death? These fundamental beliefs or principles, axioms, combined with, and hopefully I assume you see the connection between the two, combined with your answers to these fundamental questions, it dictates so much about how we see the world. And I think it's really helpful to say, that's another legitimate definition of the word faith. When we talk about like the Muslim faith, you mean something like the Muslim worldview, this set of beliefs, a set of practice. Well, I'm getting in a little more there with practices, but I hope you see the connection there between it's like this system. It's not just one or two things. It's not just the fact that you happen to have to use laws of logic. Okay, there's these other foundational ideas that dictate how we're seeing the world. So I guess I'm saying, see that you have faith in your faith, right? To say it with the definitions, your worldview is the set of fundamental things that you depend on. Your worldview is this set of beliefs or principles, these bottom foundational things that you are depending on, you stand on. It's the reason, at least partially, that you decided to go to college, that you're at this school, that you're wearing the things that you're wearing. They've all come to bear. The way you're hearing my words, when you've tuned out, when you've tuned in, it's not just, I know I'm extrapolating to habits and stuff like that, but there's a connection between subsidiary knowledge, as Polanyi's term, of how we reason and of what we're doing subconsciously, what we're doing consciously. The reason I spent a second there to say, okay, maybe don't think too much about religion, think about this bigger idea of faith, a system of thought, a worldview, is because I'm trying to point out, like, the question was, thinking people and faith, there's an incompatibility there. Similarly with something like secularism in faith. I'm trying to step to that. The idea that, if you Google secular, obviously there's different senses of secular, political theory, individual, some culture stuff, but for the most part, the common themes you'll see are something about neutrality. It's about subtracting away anything except that which was obvious. Well, first off, you're going to see different definitions, or at least different principles of what would be contained within secularism. That should make you a little suspicious. It seems like they're denominations. But further, you're saying, no, it still depends on these fundamental axioms. There are certain principles by which you're saying you're standing on. The most common, of course, is a prioritization of the here and now, matter and time. But there are others, and y'all know them. The equality of all humans. Right? The idea that we have an obligation to people who don't exist yet. The decisions we make today. These are principles. I'm going to come back to this. It's not that we don't argue for them at all, but largely, fundamentally, you argue from them. We say things like, the reason I believe in that policy is because I think this is a right. We make that claim. When X is a right, therefore this policy. How do you know that's a right? How do you know anyone has a right? Where does that come from? For most, that's the bottom. I believe it. That is the argument. I hope y'all see I'm not commenting on whether it's a good or bad one necessarily yet, right? I'm just trying to help you see this is how people think. This is how most of us think and reason. Let me illustrate this. Or just give you a quote. I'm not saying Karl Popper is patron saint of secularism or anything like that. Famous philosopher of science. He's just illustrating how people think, I'm going to jettison faith and I'm going to hold on to something else. Science, reason. Kind of. You can kind of maybe do that. Here's Karl Popper, a quote from Conjectures and Refutations. He says, I think I have said enough to make clear what I intend to convey by calling myself a rationalist. And by rationalist, he doesn't mean what I was talking about earlier with a prioritization of deductive logic. He means not a hardcore skeptic. Philosophy terms change over time. He means I'm optimistic that we can know things. That's basically what he means. I intend to convey I call myself a rationalist. My rationalism is not dogmatic. I fully admit that I cannot rationally prove it. I frankly confess that I choose rationalism because I hate violence. And I do not deceive myself into believing that this hatred has any rational grounds. Or to put it another way, my rationalism is not self-contained, but rests on an irrational faith in the attitude of reasonableness. I do not see that we can go beyond this. One could say, perhaps, that my rational faith is equal in reciprocal rights to convince others, and to be convinced by them is a faith in human reason, or simply, that I believe in man. I'm not even saying I agree with how he said all of it, about irrational faith, grounds, but hopefully it illustrates. So what you hear there is this idea that people who have thought through this are going, there is no place to stand where there is a foundation below which that is not begging the question. Why can you trust the law of non-contradiction? It doesn't contradict itself. And I go through these definitions so much to say the secularist has faith. I'm trying to help because that's what makes the conversation so much more helpful. Some people always are choosing the high ground. You don't understand. You have these beliefs and you're too dogmatic and you won't let them go. I have found some area of neutrality from which I've come up with the things I believe. I hope you'll see the impossibility of that. I love this quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says that there's only two kinds of people in the world. There's the conscious dogmatist and the unconscious dogmatist. And I've always found myself that the unconscious dogmatists were by far the most dogmatic. My hope is to make us all less dogmatic in here. Okay, so how do we move forward? I'm not saying that these fundamental commitments are arbitrary. I keep saying, okay, you reason from them, you don't reason for them. Does that mean we just all guess, and then we come up with our own little, whatever universes of reasonableness? No. Belief in the number 0, it's not arbitrary. Just the way you argue for it is different than you argue for a lot of other things. Okay? And I think it's similar for lots of our other foundational dependencies. So I'm going to give you 3 bits of advice to help you here, I hope. One is to be epistemologically self-conscious. Practice saying that, okay? Be epistemologically self-conscious. Be self-aware of how you try to come to know things. Okay, what is at the bottom for you? What are these principles you're holding on to that are just obvious? We believe these truths to be self-evident. What are those for you? They're probably not for somebody else. Okay? What are they? Be aware of them. How did they get there? How do you use them? Do you prefer empiricism or rationalism? And how do you bring them together? Do you like abduction? There's different ways that we do inference. I know that sounds like super philosophical. I know that it is, but I'm not always asking for like a Stanford encyclopedia entry when I say be aware of how you know things. That's not what I mean, okay? Yeah, I'll leave it there. You need to be self-aware. Secondly, and this hopefully will help with that, is when you think and reason about any topic or anything, be doing it from the worldview level. Okay, we talked about what a worldview is. Most ideas kind of rise and fall together in groups. Y'all know this already, right? And, it's always, I think I got this from Thomas Sowell. He says, like, when you're criticizing something, you've always got to ask, well, in comparison to what? So you're not only evaluating an idea or an argument from the perspective of this worldview, you need to do it from others. You need that contrast. And specifically, friends, growing up, super skeptical, was raised in Alabama. It's like everyone I know identified as a Christian. Like, yeah, exactly. And if I'd been born somewhere else, I'd be something else. And there's so many religions and beliefs in the world. And if I spent my entire life being a wandering monk, asking questions and studying and reading and trying to get to the bottom of it, there's no way I could figure it out in one lifetime. What's true? And one of the most helpful things that was shared with me is that, this is a little bit oversimplified, that almost every worldview fits into one of 3 categories. I hope many of you have heard this before. Fits in one of 3 categories and has to do with what do you believe about God and the universe. You either believe there is only the universe, there is no God, or you believe there is only God, there is no universe, or you believe there is both God and the universe. There's a handful of exceptions out of that. And most of them, even ones that you think about, polytheism and Gnosticism, they actually roll up into one of these pretty nicely. In fact, the first 2 are actually more similar than you think. And that helped ground me that actually, no, there aren't an infinite number. I can evaluate them in the kind of a package deal. I can be thinking and understanding stuff from the package level. I encourage you, try to think through those 3 options and you'll get far. Get really far. What are the relationships between those worldviews and various foundational principles they have to do with? Thirdly, this is maybe the most complicated one. Hopefully that's not intimidating. Like, do any of these worldviews provide you with a foundation that hold up the other foundations? Think through some of the principles we talked about here. There was this bottom laws of logic. My senses reliably telling me about the external world. The laws of physics continue. They're a constant. They don't change. And there's others, of course, that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about anything to do with morality, objective morality, or is there objective meaning? And all these foundations, we say, well, is there such a thing as goodness? There just has to be such a thing as goodness. That must exist. And it becomes one of these bedrock things that you depend on. And there are laws of logic. They just have to be there. Is there anything, is there a worldview that helps hold those up? Rather than all these disjointed centers from which you do a lot of reasoning, is maybe there actually one core on which those rest. Okay, so I give you that advice. This is one way to evaluate these fundamental ideas and fundamental worldviews in which we believe. Are there one set that are better than others, closer to the truth than others? I have a section here on faith and truth, and it doesn't matter if it's true, but I'm going to skip that for time's sake. You can ask about it in the questions if you're interested. And because the thing I want to conclude with is I never told you where I got this definition from. I never told you like when I discovered it, how I discovered it. And it actually has to do with a different question. We've been talking about the relationship of faith and knowledge. There's a relationship with faith and salvation. So, I don't know, 16, 17 years old, wrestling with plenty of things I'm dissatisfied about, discouraged about with myself, character included. I had been persuaded, you should at least try to read the Bible, right? You consider yourself an educated person, right? Or if you want to be, like, you should at least be aware. And that worked on me. I had a copy, and I started reading the Bible every day for a while. And I was very curious of how it started to put its finger on issues for me. And started these questions I was having and trying to understand. Fundamentally, I mentioned the fundamental questions about the worldview's answer. The package for me was, what is wrong with the world, and what is the fundamental solution? This fundamental problem, fundamental solution. What are they? I'm reading the Bible, reflecting on my own life and dissatisfaction. Jesus is saying things like that are shocking and persuasive at the same time. He who sins is a slave to sin. It's not what goes into your mouth that makes you unclean, it's what comes out of your mouth. Now, seeing, that's right. And the Bible's giving me the answer to my question. Yeah, what's wrong with the world? What's the fundamental problem of the world? Me. My heart. That's the fundamental problem. What's the solution? Look inside myself, pull out the true me, right? No, I'm seeing the solution must come from outside. You must be born again. You must be born from above. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law, though the law and the prophets bear witness to it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus to all who believe, for there is no distinction, for all have fallen short of the glory of God and are justified freely by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation to be received by faith. Yes. It is as if there was a homework problem that had years to work on. It's a homework problem of life, and one day it's going to be graded and turned in, and I'm trying to make progress on it, and sometimes I do, but then I'm backing up again and working on it, and one day someone comes and they're handing me the key. And I read the key, and the light bulbs are going off. Yes, I see it. That's making sense. That is what I've missed. Those are the answers through which this makes sense. And I say, that's the rescue that I need from outside. It must be by grace. It must be someone else. And it must be initiated by them and completed by them. I am unable. I need that transformation and rescue to come from outside of me. And of course, it was around this time. It wasn't one-to-one. I'm looking at other religions and ideas as well, and I find this alone message of grace, of unconditional grace. And I say yes. And I'm willing to identify as a Christian. But I'm so confused. Well, I'm so confused about lots of things today too, but I have this remaining question of those, what is faith? Because I'm reading things in the Bible that say you're saved by grace alone, and another over here says you're saved by faith alone. What has been so persuasive to me is that you don't do anything. At least to start, You don't do anything. There are no check boxes. He's done it for you. That's the Christian claim. That is what's so persuasive. But yet it's saying I must believe, I must receive it by faith. What? Is that not a contradiction? You don't do anything, you just need to believe. What is it? And so you put that together with all my questions from before about thinking and wanting to understand. What is faith? And I'm talking to my dear friend, my dear brother about this for, talked with hundreds of people, and Caleb Petrie says to me, I've just kind of always thought faith is dependence. And it was like another key being handed across, right? Dependence, that's right. It's the non-work. I don't do anything. I just rest. I enjoy. I get to lean on what he's done. It's an attitude. It's not something I do. And it made so much sense immediately of my reasoning. And what is the connection between all this reasoning I've done? I feel like I should be able to explain something about why do I believe this or why do I believe that, but yet I live by faith. That's right, I depend on him to do my reasoning. I depend on him for all kinds of revelation. I depend on him for the laws of logic, etc. Right? It made sense for me. And that definition of faith was so helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for you, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not. And that answer to what is wrong with the world, what's right world, what's right Christian worldview, I hope that you'll see that offer is extended to you as well, and you'll see it won't just help you think, it'll help you with a lot of other things as well. Okay. So thank you for the time, guys. We have time for Q&A now, so I hope y'all been having some questions come in. I'm going to invite my friend Brandon, Dr. Unruh, to come up and join me. And yeah, I hope I've said something that sparked enough curiosity for y'all to have a question or two.
Can I just add while questions are coming in? I'm only up here just to provide supplemental evidence that there are people named Brandon in the world, because I'm also a Brandon. So I'm also a psychiatrist, so I'm also up here to ensure the mental stability of the speaker tonight. So. Just as a quick reminder for everyone, you can submit your questions electronically on Slido. So if you go to that site, enter the code, you'll be able to see all the questions that other people have submitted. You can upvote them. I'm going to have it on my phone, and so I'll be having a look at that and asking the questions that have the most votes. In addition, we have some wireless microphones, which will be kind of moving around the room. So if you'd like to ask a question verbally, then a microphone will make its way towards you. So I'll give you all a few moments to add your questions to Slido while I pull it up myself. And if you have anything that comes to mind right now, just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. There's one question over here, Chris.
If you could, we'd show us your name and maybe like what you're studying here, something like that.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the lovely talk. I'm Rohit. I'm in the Department of Architecture. I'm a grad student. I have a fundamental sort of question regarding the whole idea of faith. I completely understand that empiricism and thus the scientific method involves as much faith as a faith in God. I mean, we are fundamentally, even within science, we are arguing from rather than arguing for. But at the end of the day, empiricism entails faith in our own conscious experience as opposed to faith in revealed knowledge. So if I am to argue from faith, and since I fundamentally cannot argue from a position that is not a position of faith, would I not want to argue from a position of faith that comes from within rather than a position of faith that is handed down to me, is my question.
Can you reword the way you said the first time? You said position of faith from my own consciousness versus...
Yes.
what's the alternative? How do you say it?
Revealed knowledge. Revealed knowledge, yes.
Good.
So I agree that any argument that I make, even from within the domain of science, I am fundamentally arguing from. I'm not denying the fact that even within science, I'm fundamentally resting on faith. But that faith comes from within, because I can always fall back on that faith through what I see. Should I not adopt that faith over faith that is handed down, is my question.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a good question. I'll make a couple comments, and feel free to add anything, Brandon. Two things that immediately come to mind. First is I didn't talk about, I was trying to emphasize mainly the things that we depend on at the bottom. In our everyday lives, in our conscious lives, whatever, there's actually tons of things we depend on higher up. I don't know a better way to say that. High and low. And actually the vast majority of things that we claim to know are based on our dependence on authority. And in fact, so something that gets me in trouble all the time is, I don't intentionally play devil's advocate or anything, but I'm always just like using illustrations. It makes me sound like I side with this other team. But I hate how people like make fun of, I'll give you a million examples, flat earthers, right? Not that they do necessarily. Maybe I don't like that either, but how they do it. Idiots. They believe the earth is flat. Everyone knows. When's the reason coming? When's the reason? When's the evidence coming that you know the earth is in fact not flat? Okay, maybe they give you some little anecdote about being on a plane, or that's a photograph from a spaceship, and that's good. Okay, well, we just keep going. We're made of atoms. I made the same stuff that this is made of. Yeah? How do you know that? Well, we have faith. Human society in general, the same kind of magic wizards who tell us that are the same magic wizards who made this, right? This seems to work. But the reality is, and let me not make fun of that too much, by the way. I wish it was more conscious. That's not a terrible reason necessarily. Well, I kind of trust in this world of smart people in the world I don't understand. They produce this thing that I don't understand at all, so if they tell me about this, okay, It's not the worst reason I've ever heard, for sure, but then I just want to make the parallel at least there too. I may have other reasons for believing other authority. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about the Bible, the Christian. Maybe I have reasons in which I trust that authority, view as reliable, and so I can have knowledge from it as well, just like I would have knowledge from other trusted authority, even though I myself don't have, I'm sure there's some term for it that I don't know. I myself do not do the experiments. I myself don't know the syllogisms or understand them, but people that I have other reasons for trusting, I will hold on to that knowledge too. And it's similar for that. So I don't know if that's what you mean by external, but to me, at least, I'm making that distinction between internal, external faith. I'm sorry, I'm not using your words exactly, but these other people came to those conclusions and they told me. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Is that responding at all? I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Just add maybe one, unless you wanted to come back on that.
No, not really. I mean, my only sort of counter-argument to that was that the whole idea of verifiability. So I can repeat the experiment, which I'm not sure if I can in the case of revealed knowledge.
That's good.
How does one counter the fact that if I want, no scientist will stop me from trying to repeat the experiment under the same conditions?
That's good.
So that's the only counter-argument I can think of, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good point. You want me to comment on that first, Brendan, or you want to say? Well, I mean, so there's more important things to say here than parallel, but like lots of our knowledge doesn't work that way. The most obvious example is in the area of history, right? We can't go back and repeat those kinds of experiments. We do the evidence. We try to come up with the best explanation we can, and we can't do kind of repeat it, and we may remain open to new evidence, or something like that, so maybe that's a difference or something, but no, I don't think so. So not all fields of knowledge depend on repeatability. That's unique to the scientific method.
Let me just add a couple of things as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist working in a totally different field than other Brandon works in here. And one of the things I've become convinced about increasingly in my more than 10 years working since I finished my training, I work with people who struggle with trust at a fundamental level. Specifically people with what we would call personality disorders. And one of the core features of a particular personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, is that there's a fundamental mistrust in the authority of what has been socially transmitted to the person throughout their development. So it's hard to trust their own appraisals of their own value as a person. It's hard to trust in their own appraisals of someone else's trustworthiness. It's hard to evaluate social cognitive processes at a variety of levels. Why is this relevant to your question? I think when we look from a developmental psychological perspective at how we learn through early development, throughout our socialization and upbringing, the hard distinction that we think we can make between revealed knowledge and unrevealed knowledge that we've deduced through pure rationality, I think that distinction becomes harder to hold. A quick example. One of my favorite developmental psychology experiments is where you take babies, well, they're a little bit more than babies, actually, children that are about a year old, from a year to a year and a half, and you sit them across a table, and you have two objects that are different morphology sitting on the table. And one's maybe red, and it's got a spidery-looking thing, the other's green, and it's a sort of round, curvy thing. And a research assistant comes into the room and sits down across from the child, and in the first condition of the experiment, doesn't really engage much with the child, but then actually smiles approvingly at one of the objects. And you can't see because of the mask. And you have to trust that I'm doing the facial expressions under the mask. It takes faith. And then, so smiles approvingly at one object, and then frowns disapprovingly or disgustively at the other object, right? And then puts out the hand, prompting the child to actually choose one of the two objects. Which one do they want for themselves, right? So that's one condition. In the next condition, the research experiment comes back, and this time, this is a new child now sitting here, and this time engages with the child and actually has a little bit of sort of baby talk back and forth. How are you today? You know, facial expressions, engaging the child, sort of contingent turn-taking, direct gaze sharing, all that good stuff that we know is good, important for attachment. And has an individualized interaction with the child, and then smiles approvingly at one object, disapprovingly frowns at the other object. You got the setup. So then what they're testing in this experiment is when they have a completely different research assistant come back into the room after either of the first test conditions was delivered, has the child learned from the initial teacher? Do they replicate the teacher's preference? Or is it just random? And what they find, you can probably guess, is when there's been a kind of personal investment, that before the revelation of some teaching or some knowledge, right, which one should be preferable of the two objects, if there's a personal relationship that gets developed, right, that actually dramatically increases the likelihood that the child will have learned and generalized that piece of cultural knowledge. So this becomes kind of you can read about this, it's called the theory of natural pedagogy. And it's, we think, an important developmental observation for how we get across the generations, how cultural knowledge gets transmitted. And it turns out from a kind of psychological perspective, a lot of what we come to know and believe and trust within our relationships about how the world works, I would agree with Brandon, the vast majority of what we kind of depend on a day-to-day operations as a human being, turns out to not be derived from deductive logic, but it comes from this kind of highly personalized, relationalized kind of learning conditions. So all that is just to say, but rather long-windedly, sorry if it went on too long, but I think the distinction is not so clear. What is revealed knowledge and what is not revealed knowledge? And then what is initially revealed knowledge becomes then knowledge that we empirically test and actually put to the test in our lives. So I think the distinction is not so clear always as we might like it to be. And I think knowledge that could be gained from the Bible turns out to be the same way. It's knowledge that we might initially trust, maybe because there's some other piece of the Jesus story that we found relatable or compelling, so we trust another piece of it that at first glance seems not so trustworthy. But because that initial connection, the possibility of relationship maybe spoke to us. And we go from there and we ratchet up our trustworthiness in the trust that we place in a person or a position or a worldview. And again, I think the whole way through the distinction between revealed and deduced knowledge it kind of breaks down.
Let's have a question from Slido. This is the top voted one currently. And the question is, I think Christianity is just a worldview that some people accept, but not everyone has to. Why can't we all just have our own worldviews?
I like that question a lot. I think the way I'll address it right now is to say, because it matters what's true. What is true matters. I've dealt with this with people who, were Christians. On one hand, they say something like, hey, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's not about that. I just believe, right? I just like believing it. I don't want to talk about these difficult questions or provide reasons, on one hand. And I can assure you that kind of faith is not going to be there for you more times than not. Some people can say that and they don't quite mean what they're saying. But for the most part, like when the temptation comes, when the suffering comes, that is not the kind of faith that's going to sustain. It's not the kind of faith that's going to work. To say a different way, you say we were talking about meaning in life, right? This is a classic question. Is there meaning in life? And you can analyze it from the different worldviews, and we'll just take let's pick on the atheists, I guess, and normally you get down to of course there's an admitting that there's no objective transcendent meaning. There's only the meaning that I decide on. There's the meaning that it's meaningful to me, right? You get that kind of language. You have to face heroically, courageously the world as it is and decide what you're going to do. I'm not trying to say that's what the question asker exactly had in mind about, we just pick our worldview and live it how we want to. Okay? To me, what I'm hearing is something actually quite similar to what my Christian friends say who don't want to have reasons or figure out what the foundation is. I'm just going to believe what I want to believe. I'm going to believe life is meaningful. I'm going to believe that this kind of job or this kind of morality, if I live that way, that's meaningful, and I'm going to hold on to that. And I think they're going to have the same problem when life gets hard. I really like the play Les Mis. If you haven't seen it, then this song maybe not as impactful to you, but I think this stuck out to me a ton when I heard Eponine sing this song, and I thought immediately about this issue of, doesn't matter if it's true. Can't I just have anything? And what does it matter if it's true? Okay, this is how she sings, how the song goes. She says, on my own, pretending he's beside me. All alone, I walk with him till morning. Without him, I feel his arms around me. And when I lose my way, I close my eyes, and he has found me. In the rain, the pavement shines like silver, and all the lights are misty in the river. In the darkness, the trees are full of starlight, and all I see is him and me forever and forever. And I know it's only in my mind that I'm talking to myself and not to him. And although I know that he is blind, still I say there's a way for us. I love him, but when the night is over, he is gone, and the river's just a river. Without him, the world around me changes. The trees are bare, and everywhere the streets are full of strangers. I love him, but every day I'm learning that all my life I've only been pretending. Without me, his world will go on turning, a world that's full of happiness that I have never known. I love him, I love him, I love him, but only on my own. What I hear the Christians say, what I hear an atheist say is just hold on to something, and they say that I hear like my faith is what I need. And it's not true. Your faith is only as good as what you have your faith on is faithful. Your dependence is of no benefit to you if what you are depending on is not dependable. And if it is not true, it is not going to be dependable. Christianity, if the Christian worldview is not true, then I want to know it. It is not going to be good for me. Okay, and I encourage you to have the same belief about your worldview. Anything like that?
It's hard to add to that. I'm not sure. Maybe just a quick addition. Just from another angle, again, some of you know that. Hello, sleight of hand. Some of you know that Jeffrey Epstein has been back in the news again recently. This woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, has been brought to, I guess is going to be brought to trial, or is in the middle of being brought to trial. And this came up in my feed, and it sort of sent me down one of the YouTube rabbit holes. I don't know if anybody else has followed this, but it took me back to an interview from about several years ago between Prince Andrew and one of the royal family. I don't know if anybody's seen this. Being interviewed by a BBC UK broadcaster. And it's this incredible piece of what, without making any certain claims, what sure feels like a lot of sleight of hand as you're watching it, because you see this member of the royal family coming under heavy questioning and fire, and for the course of an hour, essentially denying that he was ever involved, despite there being what seemed to be some photographic evidence, various pieces of evidence linking him to the sex trafficking ring that seems to have been run by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And I watched this interview just fascinated, sort of just thinking about, gosh, we've got two very different worldviews being spun here about what happened. And this is no mere collision of worldviews in a kind of philosophical salon. This is, real people's lives have been damaged. There is a question of truth here. And I just felt myself listening to that interview and just sort of thirsting for just the truth, whatever it may be. Just let the truth come out about this. And that's, of course, victims are crying out for that as well. So I think when we think about those kind of situations, it reminds us that, in the philosophical salon, in academia, sometimes we have a real relativism and a real openness to this idea that, multiple perspectives, they can all clash in some way. We can all really be okay with disagreeing about everything. But actually, when we watch an interview like that, and I think most of us have a thirst for the truth to come out. And I think it's through experiences like that every day that there's these signposts that we have this transcendent desire for truth, to be in the truth. Not that either of us has full claim to that, but I think we have a transcendent desire for that. I think that's what you're speaking to just now.
Thanks. Thank you. That's a good question.
We might have time for one more question.
I'm sorry.
And we'll prioritize questions from those of you who would like to ask it verbally. So, does anyone have anything that comes to mind? All right, I will ask as the final question. In fact, I'll give my phone to Brandon.
Okay.
Have a quick look through the questions, and if there's one that stands out to you, it's not quite at the top.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a great question. I don't know if anyone wants me to talk about Gödel. Let me just go with the next one as highest voted to fair to the democracy. It's a principle that I think is pretty important. Would you say that man chooses to have faith in that which favors him and disbelieves that which does not? I love that question. I suspect you know what I'm going to say. I suspect you, yes and no, right? Of course. So I'm going to say yes, and the easy way first is we know that we have that predisposition, right? And I know I have it now. I have to be aware. I used the term earlier that Polanyi uses about subsidiary knowledge, these subconscious things that we're aware of, but they're not in our focus. They're not focal knowledge, focal awareness, subsidiary awareness maybe. I'm not an expert on this stuff, guys, but and I want you, the part of being epistemologically self-conscious, to be aware of this. I need to be aware of this. I now am persuaded that the streets are full of silver, right? There is a God. There is such a thing as beauty. Beauty is real. Goodness is real. It's not an idea in my mind. If I make a comment about a burger, I'm really talking about the burger. I'm not just making a comment about the state of my mind. I don't know how I would believe that if I was not a theist. And I like it. I want that to be true. I have to be aware of that. Is that blinding me to evidence or reasons, or am I being deceived in some way because I want that to be the case? So it's fair that of course we do that. But then I'm immediately going to say no as well. This is going to maybe seem trivial to you, but I moved far away from all the grandparents, and visiting them is a nightmare because of how far they live apart. I have intentionally, consciously made terrible financial decision after terrible financial decision, and I wouldn't take it back for anything in the world. Going to grad school, horrible financial decision. Having kids in grad school, getting married, etc., etc. Like, these are all conscious choices I knew ahead of time, and I gladly made them. Moving to Boston, taking my first traditional job, right? I've had a job offer almost every year since the year I've moved here, somewhere else, but we picked Boston. So I believe things about Jesus, about the gospel, about Christianity that have led me to make decisions that I don't like. Okay? Like, they have inflicted, maybe trivially relative to many things in the world. The examples I just gave were trivial, but they're the simple ones that come to my mind right now. I would not have otherwise made them. I don't like this, right? I don't want to give away the amount of money that I give away, okay, etc. But I do that. I make those decisions. I pick the jobs I pick. I inconvenience myself regularly. Not as much as I could, sure, right? But it's because Christianity is true. A lot of ways, Christianity is true. The Bible says, this is very interesting, Jesus says, if Christianity is not true, Jesus is not risen from the dead. 1 Corinthians 15. Jesus is not risen from the dead, we are of all people most to be pitied. It goes back to whether or not it's true, right? There can we go. If Jesus is not risen from the dead, we are of all people most to be pitied. If there is not a resurrection from the dead, eternal life, one day that we are hoping in, where we will be made up for anything we lay down and sacrifice in this life, then we are fools. I'm a fool. My life decisions are stupid. Boston is kind of cool. There's a lot of cool cities that, especially 10 years ago, 5 years ago, were a lot cheaper. Okay? There's plenty of other cities so I could have moved to. All right, so yes, trivial example in some ways, but no, many of us go, no, I know it's true, and I'm going to hold on to it even if it causes an inconvenience for me. I didn't mean to take the whole time on that. Sorry. Brandon.
I think that's a good place to end.
Right, thanks. I'm sure you have something to say to wrap up, but if you don't mind, just, I mean what I said. My wife and I moved here for you. Okay? I'm happy to talk with you afterward tonight if you're interested. I'm happy to talk with you ongoingly in person in the future. Okay, that even includes every other Monday night. My wife and I host something at our house. We live on the corner of Newton, Watertown, Waltham. If you can find a way to get there, you are welcome. And you can come ask me about that. afterward. If it's not that, I'm happy for one-on-ones. My schedule's not super flexible, but I will, at some point, I will make time for you if you are interested. Okay.